Welcome. Thank you for joining me on this ArtStop, which, if you're unfamiliar, is a quick 15-minute tour of a single work of art. But I have to tell you, today's ArtStop is a little unorthodox.
Okay.
And the reason, welcome. The reason for that is today we're going to be meeting a colorful bull, like the animal, who serves as a guide to our family activities and programs here at the museum. And his name is Artie, and he's actually featured on my t-shirt right here, so meet Artie.
Hi, Artie.
Now, Artie is our family program's mascot, and as such, he serves as an indicator for programs and resources at the museum that are for the family audience. And Artie's development first began in the summer of 2011 when the Education and Public Engagement Department decided to go on a hunt for a family-friendly object in the collection, of which I'm sure you know we have many. But we found ourselves ultimately in the Asian art collection, and that's where we found our inspiration for this mascot. And so today's ArtStop, I'm actually going to take us from this space into our Art of East Asia installation, which opened in February of this year, and into the gallery space where the inspiration object for our mascot is presently being exhibited. And we'll talk a little bit more about the mascot and a little bit more about the object, which of course informed his look and his story. So I hope you'll join me there, and we'll walk this way. And here's Artie, yes, which I wasn't sure if he would be very visible, so I brought a backup just in case. And actually, I want to start by saying that we are here in the Art of East Asia installation, which holds art objects from Korea, Japan, and China. Our inspiration object, Artie, is actually from China. And after this ArtStop, I invite you to take a longer look. All of the objects in this case, as you can see, are very precious and small and delicate, and really require some lengthy time to take in all of the details. But I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the object. But before I do that, I'm going to kind of bounce back and forth between talking about the object and talking about the mascot, which quite honestly really work together, and they're both informing one another. But to start with, why did we settle on this object for our mascot? As you can imagine, there are a lot of choices within the collection. But I have to tell you, it doesn't surprise me that ultimately we found ourselves in the Asian art collection. You may have noticed as we walked this way that animals are a beloved subject in Asian art, and we knew we wanted an animal form. The reason being, this idea of a mascot in museums is a trend, a successful trend. And most institutions who have a mascot have found that using an animal form is best for the family audience. Obviously, it's very child-friendly. In some cases, it can be gender neutral. To a child, it pretty much is. And of course, we can make it into a character quite easily. Yes. So we settled on this object, but we settled on it not only because it's an animal. We also were considering the fact that it's very colorful, and we knew that that would appeal widely to children and of course all visitors. Lastly, I would say for me it's a very friendly and welcoming figure. We want this mascot to serve as our ambassador of the museum to the family audience, so it's very important that he be approachable and that the object that inspired him be one that children are going to be interested in finding and looking at further. So that was really important. So we found our object, but as you can imagine, finding that inspiration object and going to the final design form is not a process that happens overnight. There were a lot of phases in Artie's development, and ultimately we landed on what you see here, using what we saw there. And I have to take this opportunity to give a shout out to our graphic design department, especially our graphic designer Nuri Lee, who really took the Artie idea and finalized it into this cheerful and endearing character who has, over the past year, really won our hearts and won the hearts of our public and our visitors, and we're really grateful. We do. Actually, in the store, we have t-shirts for children presently, but I think there's possibilities for more, for sure. Some institutions have done everything, so we've got lots of ideas. Absolutely, absolutely. And I'll tell you that although this is the first Artie form, there's lots of possibilities for poses and costumes. You've probably, oh, do you? Absolutely. Oh, man, the possibilities are endless. And we're trying not to get overwhelmed by all of that. And at the end of this, I'll speak a little bit more to some of the upcoming developments for Artie. But I'll show you right now, for example, we have Artie here on our Search and Find, which is a family activity. And as you can see, we kind of play around with what he's doing. So as I mentioned, he starts with this basic form, but we can add things for him to be doing, make him active in an activity that you would be able to do yourself at the museum, which is really important. Now, Artie is important for highlighting family offerings here at the museum, but another important element of the mascot is to bring new attention to this installation and to the object that inspired it. So I want to tell you a little bit more right now about this piece, which of course stands on its own and has a lot to say and for me to tell you about. This object is a recumbent or resting bowl vessel. And it's from the Qing, spelled Qing, dynasty in China. Now, this object was anonymously given to the museum in 1994 in loving memory of Evelyn H. Ornstein. And it's a very special gift, and we know it's a very special object. And as such, we've taken great care to display it in this case for you to see. Now, it's really interesting when I read more about this object to learn about its history and its connections to art in Chinese history. This object was created, we think, approximately in the 18th century. We don't have a definitive time for that, but we know it's the Qing dynasty. But it's actually loosely based on ancient vessels from the time of BCE, from about the 14th century BCE, so thousands of years prior to. And those vessels look slightly different. I'm going to show you an image. These are ancient bronze vessels that are actually carved bronze, and they're called guang. And I'll pass this around for you to see. As you can see, loosely based on an animal form, I'll pass that around. But unlike our inspiration object here, the features on this are less defined. So our recumbent bull figure, we can see those ears, the horns, the hooves. When you have a chance to get a closer look, you'll see all of those wonderful features that tell us right away what kind of animal this is. These bronze vessels, as I mentioned, are carved. They're also, in order to create the bronze form, they were cast. And in casting them, if you're familiar with using a mold system, in casting them, it meant we had to bring two parts together to make a whole. And with that, a seam is created. Now on our inspiration object here, you'll notice when you have a chance to take a closer look that there is a hairline here. And this hairline is meant to loosely reference the seam in these earlier ancient vessels. Just a loose reference. Also, you may have noticed, especially looking here, that this is a lidded box form. And I'll show you another image that will prove that. Not that it's that unbelievable. But here we see the lid has actually been removed from the top. And when it comes to the image of Artie, we of course wanted to reference that. So you'll notice he has a collar, and that's meant to reference the lid. Loosely, it could also be seen by a child as just a collar. These ancient vessels were used by families in offerings to the dead, ritual vessels in which wine was placed. But this object here, made thousands of years later, would have been for a home. It would have been a decorative object, as many of the objects in this space are meant to be. And this object, however, would be meant to reference the past, to establish that family's Chinese history for any visitor who came into their home. So it's very important that there are those connections between it and its prior form. Now what you'll notice about the ancient vessel, as you probably did when you looked closer, is there's little color to it. It is a bronze vessel, as opposed to this object, which is full of color. And this, because I haven't mentioned it yet, is a cloisonné vessel. Cloisonné, you may be familiar, is a very common process, and I'll tell you a little bit more about it in a second. Most of the objects in this case are cloisonné. And the object that we're looking at, as you see, it has that strong yellow background on top of which bold colors have been added. That yellow background is important. It tells us that it belongs to an imperial family. So that's another important element and a reason why when we developed Artie, we thought very carefully about his colors. We also thought about his patterning. The patterning on top of that yellow background is referencing mythological animals. For instance, if you look closely, you'll see a dragon, a phoenix. These are symbolic animals that are important to the Chinese history and culture. And for that reason, we knew when we developed Artie that his patterning was an important component to reference the initial object and to tell his deeper story. So we, of course, included it. Now, cloisonné is a process with a long history, and actually it started in the West in the Byzantine era from the 10th to the 12th century. And it wasn't until the early 14th century that it came to China. And in that time, in particular in the Qing dynasty, it was heavily produced. And that, of course, is the time in which this bull figure was made. Now, the way that cloisonné is formed is the artisan will take metal strips, most often copper or brass, that have most likely been gilded, and use that to form sort of an outline of the image. So all of those great patterns that you see on the bull were created with the contour lines of the metal. And I know I'm a very visual person, so I'll show you kind of what I'm referring to. And I'll pass this around as well. This is a contemporary artist working with cloisonné. It's still a process used today. So again, cloisons cloisons or partitions are the metal strips and the sort of spaces that are created by bringing them together. Thank you for that question. And creating this larger image. And these cloisons come together, create an image. That metal is placed onto the base, which most often is a metal base, and heated with high heat, and that's what helps it adhere to its background. Following that, in those spaces, kind of like coloring in a coloring book, the craftsman will take a colorful glass paste called enamel and fill it in, and then again put this into high heat, and that will fuse the glass to the metal. Now, this is a time-consuming process, and if you want those bold, rich, vibrant colors that last centuries after they've been created, let's give a little credit to that craftsmanship, that means that you have to apply several layers of the enamel. In fact, a cloisonné object can have as many as 25 layers, and with each layer, you must fire between. So what we're saying is this is a time-staking process. And we want to give our proper attention to it. So I'll pass this around so you can get a closer look at that. Now, cloisonné kind of had its heyday, its highest form of refinement in the Qing dynasty when this object was created. And as you can see, this is really a masterful example. Those bold, vibrant colors that cover the entire form, that would have taken quite a bit of time to create. And this work is really a standout, I would say, among the objects that we have in the collection. So it's really nice to be able to give attention to it. As we can see, it's a smaller object, so it's easily overlooked. And this is a way we can do that. Now, Artie's development is continuing. So we have taken all of this wonderful history that we know about this object. And as I said before, it's helped inform Artie's look and story. And his future is bright. We have a lot of ideas for him. Artie, as I mentioned, was first developed in 2011, but he wasn't officially introduced to the public until February when this installation opened. we felt that was the proper time to introduce him as well as the work here. And Artie's future, presently you find him on many print materials in the museum, and we've been doing that for some time now. But we'll also hope to give him a web presence. And we are working on finalizing an Artie activity book, which will be free for families this summer when they visit the museum. And in July this year, we will celebrate the birthday of the idea of the mascot. And we'll have an Artie party for all visitors. Or just, you know, we'll wear the hats, we'll wear the t-shirts. And it's really meant, of course, not only is Artie meant to be a fun element for families visiting the museum, it's really about the museum. Artie is meant to remind anyone who comes to the museum, or maybe outside of the museum who sees him on a t-shirt someone's wearing, to say, that's right, there are wonderful pieces in that collection, wonderful pieces that can inspire educational opportunities and really bring in all audiences to the museum. So I hope you will keep an eye out for Artie.
I would certainly will.
And I invite you now to, if you're interested, take a closer look at his inspiration object, which I'm happy to say will be on view for almost 5 years, which is pretty unheard of for most of our exhibitions, but this installation is long-standing and we're really happy about that as well.